Hey everybody, I'm coming at you live on tape from my lockdown quarantine bunker, also known as my bedroom closet. Since all of my writing and photography and teaching gigs have been canceled, I have all kinds of time on my hands. And since you probably have some time too, and all sports have been canceled, I thought, let's read you one of my favorite books that I've written, Hope's Diamond. We're going to do it in serial form. I'm hoping to do this every day and that each segment will be about 10 minutes long. We'll see if that works. We're all trying to figure out what to do in all of this craziness that's enveloped the world. And, here's a little break from it all. You can even pretend you're turning the pages with me. Let's start. Hope's Diamond. Everything changes when hope comes to town. By Rodney Curtis. Hey, that's me. Best-smelling author of Spiritual Wanderer, Acute Leukemia, and Getting Laid Off. For my cousin, Chris Turner, who taught me how to slide into second base on his tiny front lawn, said my wiffle ball swing made me look like Ted Williams, and brought me a Tiger's cap in the hospital when I was at my very sickest. Acknowledgements. Early readers of this book were extremely helpful. Without them, it would have been, a badminton story based in Cleveland. I can't thank the following folks enough: Bill Palmer, Ann Hof, Venus Abraham, Darrell Abraham, Lois Adams, Kurt Martin, Dean Curtis, Joanne Curtis, Amy Friedman from Scholastic, David Crum from Read the Spirit, and Keith Turner. The soundtrack. While writing this, I kept listening to Mike Oldfield's Music of the Spheres, appropriately enough. It was in my earbuds over and over again. I think he implanted hidden messages in his celestial melodies saying, "Download my full album at Amazon." Warm-up. This is a work of fiction. If you find yourself reading the whole thing, you might forget that on occasion. But really, it's all made up. Sure, there are some names and places that might remind you of people or things you know. But rest assured, they only exist in my head, and hopefully soon yours. Take Sparky the dog, for instance. He's not real. Even if you swear he reminds you of someone, a person even, that's just crazy. Maybe you should get a hobby, or better yet, go outside and play a game of catch with your neighbor. Even the city of Detroit isn't real. No place could possibly be that cool. But hope is real. First inning, Chapter 1. 2004. It was the off-season, a grubby gray January which froze the snot in your nostrils whenever you tried looking forward to spring. The Detroit suburbs were encrusted with a glazed ice residue from last week's fake thaw, then hard freeze. No one cared about baseball or next month's spring training or anything to do with the Bengals. The Detroit Bengals stink. They've stunk for years. They were amazing back in 1984 when they started the season with an explosion and never once trailed all year. But that was 20 years ago. And even though they hired Willie Palmer, a virtual icon from their 1984 glory days, they stink worse than any team ever has in baseball. Well, almost. The Cleveland Spiders in 1899 were the undisputed worst team ever, winning only 20 games and losing 134 all year long. Last year, though, the Bengals came dangerously close to losing 120 games. Putting that in perspective, for every game they won, they lost about 3. No one in any line of work could survive those lousy stats, except, of course, corporate CEOs who make millions no matter how badly they perform. Even Willie Palmer, who huddled in his Birmingham, Michigan home with the heat cranked to 84, a subtle reference to his past that not even he realized, wasn't thinking about baseball. Sparky, his dog, needed a walk around the block to clear his bladder. Willie figured he could use some fresh air as well. 84 was too hot. So, dialing his thermostat back to 68, another unnoticed nod to great historic Bengals teams, Palmer took Sparky out into the suburban wasteland. Chapter 2. Sparky's little doggy parts instantly froze shut the moment they dangled outdoors. No matter how long Willie walked, His companion refused to squat and let loose a stream. Sparky longed for Lakeland, Florida, which, in his thick, simple dog reasoning, was the only place to live. After all, it's sunny and warm down there, and it's miserable and freezing up here. You know, dogs don't have all the facts about life, and fail to understand, most of the time, the nuances of culture and human yearnings. But in this case, he was right. And if Willie knew what his dog was thinking, he'd probably sigh in agreement and then wonder why he hadn't become a small animal doctor instead of a veterinarian for bigger animals, like Bengals. When Sparky managed to coax a reluctant trickle, Palmer looked around nervously to see if anyone was watching him. Even though a little bit of dog urine would blend in nicely with the Michigan suburban January, he didn't want to be seen as a discourteous neighbor who let his dog whiz anywhere he wanted. Unfortunately for Sparky's owner, both dog and sheepish walker were being watched. "Oh, sorry, sir. My dog hasn't peed in this millennium, and suddenly he decides to do it in the middle of your driveway," Palmer said to the man watching with a bemused grin. "That's okay. I've tried salt and sand on this ice floe. Nothing seems to break through. Maybe your dog's got the right stuff," replied the guy, who looked slightly familiar. "Sure," said Palmer. "He's the Chuck Yeager of black labs." "Don't worry about it. If it's there in May, you can come over with a mop." "Thanks. If it's there in May, I'll buy you a new driveway." The familiar stranger waved his arm with a partial motion that seemed to indicate not only forget about it, but also take care, see you later, this conversation's over. Willie Palmer turned and gave Sparky the sign to head home. Even though the dog was well trained with hand signals and knew when to walk or steal, food that is, he still kept looking behind him as they strode back. As he was walking, he thought about spheres. Big, fast ones, flying through the air right at him and jumping up and catching them. Then he was running in his mind and chasing one rolling on the ground. "I love playing ball," he said to himself with clarity, "but there's more to it than that. It's a way of life." Happy in his thoughts about chasing and catching balls, Sparky almost forgot the first thought in his mind. This guy smelled different. Chapter 3. 2 days later, the bad side of January had been mounted, and the downhill slope was spread out in front of Palmer. He never really understood the expression, "it's all downhill from here." In some ways, it meant that the going would get easier. Gravity would take over. But in other ways, Willie figured that downhill meant a fast slide into oblivion, as in, things have all gone downhill since blah-blah-blah. Since what? Since I took over the Bengals? Since I decided that I couldn't rest on my all-star laurels? Since I bought into Mike Fidrich's notion that I could breathe life into this team in the city? Fidrich, the owner of the Bengals, had been pushing Palmer ever since he left the team in the early 90s to come back as a coach or a front office man. Only in the past few years did he think he had any shot at all of luring the former shortstop back as a manager. Another boring evening was calling it a night as Palmer watched sports enter in his overheated home. He thought about how Fidrich got him back wearing the Old English B, and he couldn't help but feel as though he'd been conned by a rich businessman who only cared about the B in Bucks and not the B in Bengals. Sparky's insistent scratching on the sliding glass door yanked Willie out of his stupor. The dog always gave the signal when he wanted to go out and take a pee, and his owner had learned the hard way that when his dog said now, he meant now. Lifting himself off his lazy boy and glancing at the clock, he thought to himself that 11:11 was late for Sparky, and he hoped that the dog hadn't found another place to pee on the basement linoleum earlier in the evening. As he yanked on the sliding door, he remembered that he had to get the thing fixed because in the dead of winter, it was almost impossible to open. This time, though, maybe because the house was so warm, the door flew down its tracks like a runner stealing second base. Before Palmer could recover, Sparky jumped outside and took off running toward the gate. Normally, Sparky waited to get attached to his retractable leash that hung like a doggy noose just outside on the deck. A second wire goes from the house out to the distant tree in the backyard, and it serves as a dog run and keeps the poop that Sparky produces in one long, thin, confined base path in the backyard. This time Sparky swung for the fence, and by the time his owner-manager was able to shout his name, like an aerial Airedale, he soared up and over the chain-link fence, which separated his yard from freedom, and bolted toward his destination.